Order, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Get ready for the next motion. Nice and settled, that's good. The next conversion practices, I'll ask the clerk to read the motion. Clerk, please.
That this Assembly deplores that harmful and damaging conversion practices are still legal in Northern Ireland, recognises that conversion practices can take many forms and can occur in a variety of settings, notes the findings from the May 2024 publication A Study of Conversion Practices in Northern Ireland by Professor Fidelma Ash and Dr Danielle Mackle, reaffirms its support for a ban on conversion practices in all forms and calls on the Minister for Communities to commit to bringing forward legislation on an effective ban on conversion practices before the end of the current Assembly mandate.
Thank you. I call on Colin McGrath to move the motion on behalf of the opposition.
So moved, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Agreed to allow up to 1 hour for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have 5 minutes to propose and 5 minutes to wind. As an amendment has been selected and is published on the Marshall list, the Business Committee has agreed that 8 minutes will be added to the total time for the debate. Please open the debate on the motion, Colin.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. The history of homophobia in this country is a long one which for too long has heaped shame on the LGBT sons and daughters simply for being who they are. Now, there has been much progress over the years to enable the LGBT community to be who they are and live the life that they have. But despite the great progress is made on this island, this particular form of bigotry, we know that it has not gone away. Recent research into schools in Northern Ireland found that 68% of LGBT+ students face bullying, the results of which contribute to higher levels of depression, self-harm, drug abuse and suicide. And perhaps even more concerning is that the 2019 Education and Training Inspectorate, the ETI report, recorded that 1/3 of pupils in Northern Ireland thought that their school was not welcome to LGBT+ community. Perhaps then it is little wonder that the scourge of homophobia persists and remains something that we in this chamber must continue to fight. There is, of course, a particular grubby practice in this part of the country that we must address today, one which does nothing to remedy the above abuses, but rather further a culture of intolerance and fosters shame, self-loathing and guilt on the LGBT community. A practice that has been entirely debunked by the medical and therapeutic establishment, one that is sometimes profitable for those who push it, and one that preys overwhelmingly on young people, sometimes as young as just 13. Conversion therapy will one day be studied alongside electric shock therapy and other forms of discredited and harmful practices with bleak curiosity by future students of history. But today in Northern Ireland, the stigmatising, highly damaging and valueless practice endures. Despite these practices having been roundly dismissed by all credible medical bodies and condemned as deeply homophobic by LGBT+ rights groups, they unfortunately continue to find a market here in Northern Ireland. The forms of therapy can differ across the world. Some are sold as talk therapy cures, whilst others can involve heinous so-called corrective rape therapy. All forms cause great harm to vulnerable individuals and erode sense of dignity and self-worth. All of those who have spoken out about their experiences of conversion therapy have unanimously stated that they were not just a waste of time and money, that they do not work, but that they are in fact invasive, manipulative and predatory by design. The fight to end homophobia in this country will not end with the banning of conversion therapy, but it will be yet another step in the right direction. What we as members of this House must do today is to move swiftly to end a frankly brainless practice, one pushed sometimes openly, sometimes quietly, but always failing the people at the heart of it. There may be those in this chamber that will claim that the LGBT+ community seek conversion therapy of their own volition. But such an argument is misleading, and fails to recognise that most enter into such practices under the fear that they will be ostracised from their families, shunned by their friends, and condemned to live on the uneasy margins of societies, attitudes that are the very hallmark of homophobia. Yes, yeah.
Clear. Is the member saying that if an individual of whatever background asks for prayer and counselling in a religious setting, that should be banned?
I thank the member for his intervention.
The member has an extra minute.
They're absolutely not my words, they're yours, as you've just stood up, and they were at no point any words that I used. And I think it actually gets to the next point that I was about to make, which is on the DUP amendment. And I think it's where we need to be utterly careful with such remarks that you have just made. Because this is not about banning the ability for people to go and seek pastoral care. This is not about banning an individual that wishes to go and pray with their religious leader. To actually do that, I think, would be absolutely and utterly unfortunate and not something that we should be banning. But no, because you put words into other people's mouths that aren't what have actually been said. So previous interventions have been so misleading, I don't wish to take any more for this debate. I think that the issue of somebody that assesses another individual and says that the lifestyle and the life that they have is something that is wrong and needs to be changed, and that they try to push that person to convert from who they are, I think that is a practice that we should see banned. Nobody here wishes to see anybody that wishes to go and speak to their religious leader being banned. However, in terms of the DUP amendment, it does suggest that we go back to the drawing board, that we go out and consult again. It does suggest that we take that consultation and try and progress some legislative options. I think that's pushing us back to the starting line again. Those practices have been done. We know where we stand, and I think we need to just progress and get the ban implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Brian Kingston to move the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No member of this...
Brian, all you have to do is say...
Oh, sorry. Indeed. I move the amendment.
Okay, thank you. 5 minutes to propose and 3 minutes to wind. All other speakers will have 3 minutes. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I was going to say, no member of this Assembly, I trust, will ever defend any form of abuse, nor the coercion of any individual. Any such practice should rightly be condemned. When we examine the issue of conversion therapy worldwide, it is clear that it has included both coercive and abusive practices being inflicted on people in the past. There is no justification for that, and there never will be. Those extreme examples of conversion therapy that I'm referring to are already illegal in the UK, and there is currently legislation in place to prosecute for these offences. What is also clear is that there are instances of individuals from a faith background who approach friends, parents, ministers, or their small group for pastoral support and deeply personal conversation on matters relating to their own sexuality. The pastoral support I am referring to here is genuine pastoral support, not a course of therapy that in some countries in the world is then dressed up to look similar to clinical therapeutic intervention. I will briefly. Yes.
I thank the member for giving way, and he mentions that many of the most heinous acts of conversion practice are already illegal under existing law, but surely he would acknowledge, given the evidence that we have available to us, that some forms of it are falling through the cracks.
And the member has an extra minute.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that the wording of this motion wants an effective ban on conversion practices. So it is not making any distinction. What we are seeking to do is ensure that support that is given genuinely and lovingly is not then misinterpreted or is not the grounds for someone to seek a prosecution of someone who's trying to act in response to someone seeking personal support. And we think it is possible to make some distinction rather than including everything in just one category. So as I say, genuine pastoral support is wholly different from the abusive practices that I've outlined at the start of the speech. In this case, the individuals are not being coerced, forced or pressurised to seek support, but of their own volition are sincerely seeking personal and spiritual assistance. In the wording of the original motion before us, those affirming mainstream Christian teaching and the faith position of other religions on same-sex attraction could well be prosecuted and handed a significant fine or even potentially a prison term. In fact, this could even apply to parents who provide orthodox religious guidance to their children. According to the report, which is referenced clearly in the motion, the definition of conversion practice is, quote, all medical, psychological, religious, cultural, or any other interventions that seek to erase, repress, or change sexual orientation and or gender identity of a person, end quote. It provides no provision or recognition for same-sex attracted individuals who actively and honestly seek guidance or support. The document also states, quote, therapy that supports an LGBTQI+ person with personal, emotional, psychological or spiritual issues relating to their sexual orientation or gender identity, where that support does not seek to direct that person to suppress, cure or change their sexual orientation or gender identity, are not considered conversion practices, end quote. This, however, is extremely vague and does not deal, for example, with the case of a same-sex attracted person of faith who wishes to remain celibate and goes to their minister to ask them to pray for them. In our amendment, we seek to provide protection for the individual seeking support and also for the person providing it. We must allow freedom of choice for anyone seeking pastoral support, and this support must be equitable. The absurdity of the original wording in the motion is that, in its application, a heterosexual person seeking prayer and guidance on their sexuality or sexual practice could receive it from their minister. However, a homosexual person seeking the same could be leading that minister into committing a prosecutable offence. Essentially, this motion, if it was in law, could also be used to criminalise any minister or priest teaching or communicating within the confines of a church building what is simply a mainstream Christian sex ethic. In summary, we are completely in support of banning the harmful, coercive and abusive aspects of conversion therapy, and this is clearly reflected in our amendment. But these aspects must be defined, which the original motion fails to do. We also want to see religious liberty and freedom.
Could the member draw his remarks to a close, please?
Yes, I'm just last sentence. And that same-sex attracted individuals should be able to receive the personal support they request in sincerity without the risk of criminalising others.
Thank you. And I call on Emma Sharon, and just to remind the speakers, you have 3 minutes.
I rise today in support of this motion and welcome the opportunity for this debate again. Obviously, we've seen a similar motion supported in this House in April 2021, so we know the position of the House in terms of banning harmful conversion therapy, and we know the majority of MLAs in this chamber support it, and I believe that's to be welcomed. And I suppose in relation to that, I would remind members that an awful lot of the work on this has to be done, and so it is really has already been done, and so it is time for action here. My party colleague Deirdre Hargey, when she was in the department, carried out an awful lot of the research in terms of banning conversion therapy, so a lot of that has already been done, and what we need now is action. This is really about rights. This is about protecting people's human rights. Everybody has the right to a life free from harassment, and that is something that we all should be prioritising. We have a responsibility to protect the most vulnerable in our society, and we know, as has already been outlined by the proposer of the motion, that our LGBTQI+ community have been marginalised, have been ostracised, have been physically and verbally discriminated against, have been discriminated against by successive governments, both here and across the world, and that is something that we need to change. And this is one step in doing that, because conversion therapy and everything that surrounds it legitimises homophobia. It tells people that they are wrong simply for being who they are, and that is not something that any of us should want to associate ourselves with. That is something that we should be outlawing and that we should be telling very clearly, particularly to our young gay people, that we do not want to see continuing, that they are valid and that they have the same rights as anyone else and should be free to live their life as who they are. So I suppose as a party, Sinn Féin have made it very clear where we stand on this issue, and we want to see this progressed. And I think this is a time now for action, and we want to see that happen without delay. Gormagat.
Colin Owen Tennyson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And the Alliance Party's vision is one of a more shared, equal, tolerant and united community, one where diversity is celebrated and where everyone's rights are protected and respected. We are committed, therefore, to taking steps to ensure people in Northern Ireland are protected from harm based on who they are or whom they love, including through the delivery of a comprehensive ban on cruel and archaic conversion practices. Such practices were conceived at a time when homosexuality and transgender identity were considered mental disorders in need of cures. Today, thankfully, LGBT identities are widely recognised as a totally normal part of human development, and so-called conversion therapy has been discredited by organisations including the British Psychological Society, NHS England, the Association of Christian Counsellors, and virtually every reputable medical and counselling body across the globe. And yet, despite these changes and all of the evidence that we now have in our possession, we know that these degrading, destructive and denounced practices persist and are still being inflicted on LGBT people in Northern Ireland today. We know that thanks to research such as the work conducted by Professor Fidelma Ash and Dr. Danielle Mackle, and I want to place on record my thanks to them and to their participants for their important work. We know that perpetrators of conversion therapy prey upon internalised feelings of fear and shame in those struggling with who they are, often taking advantage of young, vulnerable LGBT people and fraudulently subjecting them not to treatment but to torture. And Mr. Speaker, even if it were possible to change someone's fundamental nature, I would argue that our time would be better spent making bigots and proponents of conversion therapy more compassionate and leaving LGBT people alone. It is true that existing law already addresses some of the harmful behaviour often associated with conversion practices, including situations involving physical violence and threatening conduct. It is also true, however, that there are gaps in the law which allow some forms of conversion practice to fall through the gaps. That is why, should legislation not be forthcoming from the Communities Minister, I will seek to introduce a private member's bill to ban these practices once and for all. And Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that when we debate these issues, some will seek to pit LGBTQ+ people against people of faith. That argument, of course, holds no water and ignores the plurality of our society, where there are in fact many people who are both LGBTQ+ people and people of faith. As a member of a Liberal Party, I believe fundamentally in religious freedom, both freedom to and freedom from religion. But I also reject a situation where religious freedom is only invoked in the name of discrimination and harm against minorities. There is no intent to criminalise expressions of traditional religious belief, far from it, but rather the intent is to criminalise those heinous, coercive and harmful practices, and I am absolutely committed to doing that. And Mr. Speaker, in that regard, I'm happy to engage with any member, because I actually think Mr. Kingston's concerns about the motion aren't actually based in fact in terms of what is being proposed. So I'm happy to work with any member in this House to ensure that a comprehensive ban on conversion therapy can be delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, and I call on Doug Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm a straight man. I was born straight. There is no fix or cure for me or any therapy that's going to make me a gay man. Therefore, why on earth would anybody say that a gay man was not born that way? Why would we say that a gay man can be fixed or cured? Why would we say that there is a therapy to change a gay man into a straight man? There is not. It's simply ludicrous to say so. That's the words I used when I opened this debate in 2021 on conversion therapy. The motion passed. It passed because we spoke and we looked at people's concerns and we addressed them. And I've always been clear, conversion therapy is humiliating and it is harmful. So I go back to that piece to say we need to work together. Does this motion bring us further forward from 2021 whenever we had this debate, or does it leave us stuck in another argument? That's my genuine concern, that it may not. I understand people's concerns about religious freedom. The right to pray, to preach, to counsel, to give pastoral care to someone who seeks support should not be diminished. I do not believe that private prayer about sexual identity conducted in a private, supportive, affirmative way is conversion therapy, unless it is subversive and harmful. I do not believe that pastoral care is about changing someone's gender identity, unless it is deliberately targeting the young or the vulnerable with the intent to do so. I really do not. I do think that the party to my right has brought forward an amendment which tries to strike a balance, which tries to just raise a concern, and that's what they've done. And I think I can support that amendment and will support that amendment. A person of faith should be supporting banning conversion therapy, not in spite of their faith, but because of their faith. I'll use a line which I used back in 2021. A young female member of the LGBT community once said, "It won't always be like this. It's going to get better." I never knew Lyra McKee, and she will never see that better that she foresaw. However, it is incumbent on us all to reach inside ourselves in order to change this practice of conversion therapy. And we can do that if we work together, if we understand concerns. And there are concerns, and we cannot diminish them, and we cannot just say, "You're wrong." We can only change if we genuinely listen to each other's concerns. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I call Sean Mulholland, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin, I want to frame what I am about to say with an acknowledgement of the concerns that have been raised with me regarding the freedom of religion narrative. There are those who wish to propagate fear and division when it comes to this issue. The suggestion has been made that what we wish to ban is the practice of prayer and spiritual engagement, and it's simply not the case, and it is a misrepresentation and a misunderstanding of what conversion therapy actually is. The examples that the member for North Belfast gave regarding non-coercive conversations, prayer, spiritual guidance, teaching and counselling, where consenting, non-vulnerable adults question their sexuality or gender identity, are not conversion therapy and should not be criminalised. That is not what is being referred to here, and that must be made clear. Many Christian denominations and religious leaders have publicly denounced the conversion therapy, recognising it as a harmful practice that contradicts the core tenets of love, compassion and respect for all individuals that exist in Christian faith. The aim of legislative involvement is not to undermine religious beliefs, but to ensure that every individual, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity, is protected from practices that have been widely condemned by medical, psychological and human rights organisations worldwide. Conversion therapy encompasses a range of interventions aimed at changing an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity to conform to heterosexual or cis-normative gender ideals. The aim of such interventions is explicit in its desire to change some element of the individual's identity that it assumes is broken. Those who are vulnerable or at risk or under 18 simply cannot give informed consent, consent being another key element. This is what sets these practices apart from the notions of praying for or praying with. There are so many testimonies from LGBTQIA+ people of faith who have spoken about their desire to have this practice banned, as they cherish their faith and they want to be able to practice it without fear. Given it is this cohort for whom this practice poses most detrimental risk, surely we should listen and heed their calls. The Church of England outlined in their briefing on the topic that any proposed legislation should focus on preventing coercive abusive practice, that any restriction should focus on specifically coercive behaviour in pastoral care. Again, let me reiterate, we are not talking about interfering with people's right to practice their faith. Their ability to engage in mutually agreed prayer conversations, individuals should still be free to request non-coercive prayer if they wish to explore their sexuality or their gender identity. It is the coercive and abusive practices with a predetermined outcome of changing someone's identity that we want to see banned. My party has consistently championed the rights of the LGBTQIA+ community. In previous debates, we've highlighted...
Would the member draw remarks to a close,
yes,
please?
Sorry. So to conclude, I am clear on what side of the divide I want to be on, and I'm clear what side Jesus calls me to be on. And Speaker, that's the side that I am putting forward today.
Can I call on Sinead McLaughlin, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to think that everyone across this chamber will be united today in opposing conversion practices. This pseudoscience is nothing short of barbaric, predicated on the idea that LGBT people need a cure. It has been termed a significant risk of torture by the UN independent expert on the protection against violence and discrimination, and it has been denounced by just about every credible medical expert. It is sometimes called therapy, but it is nothing of the sort. It is undeniable torture designed to repress people's identity, which I think is one of the most cruel things that can be done to any individual. But also it is worryingly common. In 2022, YouGov survey found that 18% of LGBT people had been subjected to efforts to change, to cure, to suppress their sexual orientation or gender identity. The fact that we have still not banned this practice is an outworking as well of how dominated our society has been by religious organisations and coercive social conservatism. In my view, there is nothing Christian about conversion practices, and I know Christians and people of all faiths are opposed to such practices. But it is 2024, and the slow progress on LGBT plus rights is a sign of society which is entrenched in fear and hostility towards people of difference, rooted in a patriarchal norms and standards and dominated by religious teachings. When we have made progress, it's often been made not by this chamber but by Westminster, and this Assembly has so often failed to act for LGBT people. So LGBT people have already had traumatic experiences in this society and been subjected to levels of fear and discrimination that would shame other parts of these islands. Now, it's the job of our politicians and this Assembly to unpick that history. Banning conversion practices is part of that journey. Amnesty International also support our call today, calling conversion practices inherently humiliating, demeaning and discriminatory. They have been clear that international human rights law prohibits conversion practices and that any bill brought forward must meet the recommendations of the UN independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity. So the question is not whether this Assembly supports a ban. Instead, it is about when will we get the ban over the line. I was really disappointed that in the last mandate we failed to introduce such a ban. We were told a ban was to be introduced by that minister in the last time we
debated it. Could the member draw remarks to close, 2021. Please?
Let's do this. Let's get this over the line. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I call on Mr. Allister.
Speaker, one of my issues with this motion is its lack of definition. Some speakers have been anxious to say, oh, it doesn't apply to faith issues or anything else. But that's not what the motion says. And in fact, the motion is centred around a LGBT promoted report, which itself gives a very clear insight into what it is directed at. Because that report is a conglomerate of pretty confused stories from 10 individuals. And one of them's complaint is that they experience prayer, Bible studies, and teaching And that is offered in this report as an example of conversion practices. Now, if that's what conversion practices are, and if that's what this motion is seeking to outlaw, then it's something which is wholly wrong-headed and inappropriate. Of course, the extreme issues about electric shock and all that, which is already an offence, are totally wrong. But to try under the radar, which is what this motion is doing, to embrace issues of religious teaching is wholly wrong. I'm tempted to say maybe the real word of offence is conversion. Conversion is not a wrong or a bad concept. None of us, by nature, like to admit our failings or even our sins. But it's the reality of those that for some make conversion relevant and necessary. And to deny Christian churches the right to pursue their work, to pray with those who seek it, to read and expound their scriptures with them, those are things which cannot be outlawed if we believe at all in religious freedom. They rather are things to be protected. But it seems to me that so often in this society, the cry for equality and freedom from this quarter is only for LGBT plus interests, but not for Christians, not for freedom of religion. It is that which is under threat. And I return to the point. This is a motion which does not define what it means, but does, in its innards, in terms of the report it quotes, make it very clear where it wants to go.
Thank you. I call on Jerry Carroll.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it a shame that the rights of the LGBTQ plus community remain up for debate in this Assembly and in wider society? And isn't it a shame that people's sexuality or identity are subject to such questioning, widespread bigotry, or that they are open to the most appalling forms of abuse in the guise of so-called conversion therapies? These are abuse. These abuses, conversion therapies, as they're called, are disgraceful, archaic, a remnant of a time when to be part of the LGBTQ plus community was to be viewed as evil, sick or sinful. These so-called cures include sickening forms of violence, including corrective rapes, exorcisms and use of drugs, or other forms of physical punishment, and such methods are often propagated by people who make a fortune plying their harmful trade. Who are these grifters to tell anyone who they are or how they should live their lives? Not that it should need saying, but conversion therapies do not work. Any suggestion that they do is rooted in oppressive attitudes towards the LGBTQ plus community and outright pseudoscience at best. The proven outcomes, though, Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, of conversion therapies on victims is low self-esteem, depression and suicidal thoughts. Nobody should be subjected to such human rights abuses, but in particular, we must recognise the vulnerability of children and young people to conversion therapy practices, and anyone who claims to stand for the protection of children must oppose their exposure to such coercion and violence. Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, I think it's important to underline the point in this motion that we need to ban all forms of conversion therapy. And if we need a lesson how not to do policy or how to inflict more misery on people, then we only need to look at the approach of the Tory government. This government has stated that they will ban conversion therapy for lesbian, gay and bisexual individuals, but not for trans, non-binary or asexual people. Make no mistake, Deputy Speaker, this is not because the Tories care, but because they have buckled under the weight of public opinion. It's because the vast majority of people no longer accept the notion that sexuality is somehow a mindset or a choice, and they will not accept the oppression of gay, lesbian or bisexual people. In other words, this is an act of self-preservation by this hated Tory regime. And the reason they once discriminated against people attracted to the opposite sex is the same reason they now want to whip up a moral panic about the trans community. And the calculation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by the Tories and others is simple. If the public is in a panic about trans people, they are less likely to kick up a fuss about the destruction of our health service or government infringement of civil rights on protests and the right to protest. If people are focused on the migrant, the asylum seeker or refugee, they are less inclined to challenge the government for failing to invest in social homes homes, public services or working class communities. In short, divide and conquer, Mr Deputy Speaker. And the final point about religion, the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, Dr Ahmed Shahid, has said a ban would not violate freedom of religion or belief under international law because of the
Could
harm
the member bring his remarks to a
involved
close,
in
please?
conversion therapy. The ban conversion therapy in all its forms outright. Thank you.
Very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to respond to the motion. And I think it's fairly clear from the debate today that there actually is support from right across the chamber for a ban on those abusive, coercive, degrading and humiliating conversion practices, some of which we have heard about. And that this is regardless of the setting, whether it be in a medical, therapeutic, religious or secular one. However, members will recognise that this is a hugely complex issue, and this is due in part to the ambiguity that exists in regards to how we define conversion practices. Now, having listened to all of the speakers in the chamber today, I think that there is a level of consensus. We want to make sure that we do not have these abusive practices, but at the same time, there seems to be wide support for the protection of religious freedom, of prayer and of pastoral support. Therefore, I hope it does follow, Mr Deputy Speaker, that all members will be supporting the amendment to the motion this evening, because I believe that that is somewhere where I think that everybody can land, where we provide that protection, but we make sure that there is no impingement in terms of freedom of religion and freedom of speech. So I hope that we are able to come to a consensus this evening. But I do just want to warn that this is a complex issue. It is cross-cutting, and development of legislation to ban these practices will require careful analysis of all the elements involved. Indeed, if we do establish a definition of what conversion practices are, I think we also then need to examine whether there is a gap in the law, and then how we can best fill that gap in a way that is compliant and consistent with human rights legislation. My work is ongoing within my department to inform policy proposals in order to bring forward legislation if that is required. And my colleagues have, my officials have also worked closely with their colleagues from other jurisdictions to learn from their experience. The extent of the complexity of any potential ban is evidenced by the work in other jurisdictions on this issue. There's currently no existing legislation which exclusively bans conversion practices in the UK or the Republic of Ireland. The UK Government has previously committed to bringing in a ban on conversion practices, which will extend to England and Wales, although the timetable for introduction is currently unclear. A Scottish bill is also being prepared, with consultation on policy proposals just completed, and legislation to ban conversion practices is also being progressed in the Republic of Ireland. But each of these jurisdictions has experienced difficulties at arriving at a precise definition of conversion practices and of what a potential ban would include. And the matter of freedom of rights is a significant one which also has to be carefully considered, and it is an issue which we have to approach cautiously as we progress policy around this issue. Now, this motion refers to the publication, A Study of Conversion Practices in Northern Ireland, which was recently published, and my predecessor agreed to award a grant towards funding this research, which was coordinated by a consortium of local LGBT organisations. It was undertaken by academics from Ulster University and Queen's, and it explored this issue. I've received the report, which examines several aspects of conversion practices, such as why, how and where these practices happen, who experiences them and their effects. However, I do want to emphasise that these findings and recommendations are those of the authors. They do not represent the views of my department. They are not government policy. They do provide evidence, but evidence that must be supplemented and built upon as my department progresses to formulate policy around a potential ban. I can understand the interest to progress legislation on this quickly. However, it is a complex and sensitive matter, And the development of effective legislation takes time, and the necessary steps must be taken to ensure that the resulting legislation is fit for purpose. It will require further engagement with all of those who have an interest in this matter, and it will also require careful formulation of policy proposals and the drafting of precise primary legislation for the consideration of the Assembly. It just takes me on to a couple of the comments that were made. Mr McGrath said it's time to get it done, get on with it. Sinead McLaughlin said something similar. Emma Sheeran said that the research had already been carried out. Well, actually, the department hasn't even consulted on this yet. And if we recognise that this is a significant and complex issue, surely we should at least have that basic consultation and have that information. Yes, we have this report in front of us, but it's very much one side of the overall conversation that needs to take place. So the idea that we are just ready to go forward with legislation at this point is just incorrect. We need to have that greater understanding. We need to hear from everybody, and importantly, we need to make sure that we get it right in terms of what that legal definition would be, because that is what has tripped up others elsewhere. So we will have engagement. It will be a cross-cutting issue, and it will require engagement with other departments. And now I fully understand there will be concerns around what any potential ban will include. And while it is important that we have protections against coercive, abusive and unsafe practices, it's vital that rights are also protected, such as freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And I can assure members that careful consideration will be given during the formulation of policy to a precise definition of the practices involved and the exclusions that may need to be in place if legislation is to progress. And extensive engagement with all of those who have an interest will be important during this process. So further research and engagement are needed to avoid failure to produce a robust and effective ban in the future, and I've asked my officials to scope options for doing so. So just in conclusion, I do believe that everyone around this chamber has the same outcome, wants to see the same outcome. Yep, I'll give way.
Does the Minister recognise that pretty much everybody in this House, people who are religious or not, respect the right to people to practice religion and to pray privately? But does he understand there's a difference between that and people using the pulpit to attack people based on their sexuality, their gender, whether they're trans or the community they come from? Does he recognise there's a difference in those two things?
Well, of course we need to protect everybody, but we have freedom of speech, we have freedom of religion, we have, well, he seems unsure about that. We do. We have freedom of speech, we have freedom of religion, and having those things means that we have the right to say things that others may disagree with, because I hear things from others that I disagree with, that I may find objectionable as well. But that's what living in a free society is all about, that we hear and that we listen and we express views that may not be to everybody's taste. So we need to make sure that the balance is right. And actually, I think that is what nearly everybody else in this chamber wants to see as well, to make sure that we do not have those harmful and abusive practices in place, and that if we find that a gap exists currently in legislation, that is filled, but we don't do anything that is inconsistent and that is not compliant with human rights legislation. I think that is an entirely appropriate and proportionate step to take, and that's why I think that everybody in the House, based on the comments that they themselves have made, will support the amendment to the motion. I know that people want to see this done quickly. I cannot commit to a specific timescale, because I believe that the engagement is what is most important, and I look forward to that engagement taking place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sinead. And I call on Maurice Bradley to wind on the amendment, and you have 3 minutes, please.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, has been an interesting debate, if not challenging. Our amendment, I think, is self-explanatory. While I would agree that the abusive practice of conversion therapy can affect the mental health of anyone who may be subjected to it, I also recognise that this practice has been rejected by medical professionals, as it should be, and we support a ban on such practices. It is nonetheless important to recognise that where an individual voluntarily or actively seeks prayerful or pastoral support, this should be underpinned. One cannot rule out the value and importance of support and pastoral guidance from churches to their parishioners and congregations. Often the church is a confidential and trusted point of first contact. During the debate, Mr McGrath opened up with he makes the point of historical homophobic abuse, sometimes hostile and non-acceptable to those within the LGBT+, which I agree with. And my colleague points out the cohesive and abusive practices cannot nor should not be tolerated, and they're not acceptable in any form. We would agree in that. So Emma Sheeran, in support of the motion, highlights a lot of work has already been done and calls for action. Mr Tennyson speaks of equality and togetherness and the need for change and possibility of harmful abuse through conversion therapy and calls for a ban, which I think we all want, but we want to protect religious freedom and freedom of speech at the same time. Doug Beattie highlights his birthright as a man, a straight man, that cannot be changed by therapy. And I agree with that. We are who we are, and indeed anybody born into the LGBT+ community cannot be changed by therapy. They are who they are. We are who we are. Sam Mulholland, misrepresentation of faith, and highlights a Christian ethos of compassion, love for fellow human beings. Sinead McLaughlin calls for support from for full support from the Assembly. Jim Allister challenges the meaning of the motion, calls it an under-the-radar attack on education and religion, calls for freedom of religion and Christian teaching to be protected. And Jerry Carroll calls it a shame that the LGBT+ rights are under debate in this House. Deputy Speaker, I think it's important that we recognise the right to pastoral support and care. Therefore, I would urge colleagues to support our amendment, which agrees to provide that protection while protecting religious freedom and the right of expression. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yep.
This member made the point that I wish to emphasise. We would ask, listening to the comments from the other members saying, oh no, the legislation would not mean this, it would not mean the prosecution of people sincerely giving pastoral support.
Could the member take a seat, please? Could the member take a seat, please? Yes, sir. It's an intervention you were supposed to make. You're now making an additional speech. I'm not allowing that. Okay. Call on Matthew O'Toole and to wind on the debate, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. The purpose of our opposition day today was to focus on rights, on human rights and the rights that underpin a civilised, free, plural society. We talked about a free press, we talked about the need for standalone hate crime legislation, and now we are talking about the need to proceed with something that this Assembly, as several speakers acknowledged, has already agreed in a previous version of its existence in 2021, has already agreed should be proceeded with, and that is a ban on harmful conversion practices, on the grotesque practices which are underpinned by the completely not just outdated but profoundly objectionable and even evil notion that human beings can be, sometimes through violent or traumatic practices, changed from who they are fundamentally. This Assembly has already agreed, as I said, in 2021 that we proceed with a ban on harmful conversion therapy. So the purposes I will give way. So the purpose of our motion is to underline and progress that principle. I'll give way to Mr Elliott.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and thank the member for giving way. Very quickly, does he accept, though, that there is a huge lobby here and a huge support for banning those therapies that he talks about? But the report that they reference, the Professor Ash and Dr Mackle report, conflicts the issue around private prayer.
I'm glad he raised that, because I was going to raise it in responding to some of the points. The report that is noted by Dr Ash and Dr Mackle is not draft legislation, nor is it a draft policy paper. It is an academic study of practices. It doesn't, in noting the findings, we note the findings because it was commissioned by an executive minister as research to inform policy. That's what it does. Will every single line of that be converted into policy or legislation? No. So I don't think that noting the findings of that review is a reason not to support the motion, and I do need to make some progress now. Because,
and the member has an extra minute.
I have an extra minute, okay. But my time is still relatively short, Mr Deputy Speaker. I will respond to a couple of the points to a few of the points that were made. Let me say actually that despite the fact that we respectfully will not be able to support the DUP amendment, I do acknowledge the fact that there is a degree of consensus in the Assembly around the need to ban harmful conversion practices, and also that there is a need that whenever legislation is brought forward, and I hope it is, that some of the issues that are talked about around religious activity are exempted, and there's no question at all that non-harmful, what is called prayerful activity, as it's called, and faith-based activity, such as Mr. Kingston elaborated upon, is outlawed. But to be honest, I don't think that is a realistic prospect anyway. I don't, I'm afraid, accept some of the risks that he put forward, and I think it's really, really important that people of faith, many people of faith of a whole range of different denominations and backgrounds, are themselves LGBTQ, or they have LGBTQ family members. They want to see this harmful practice banned. I think it is genuinely a shame that we have to put the interests of people of faith and LGBTQ people and their families and friends against one another, because there's much more overlap there than we think. But I acknowledge that members in his party have approached this debate even though I disagree with some of the points they've made, I acknowledge that they've approached it in a respectful way in large part. But I just want to come on. I will give way briefly, yes.
But I think there's a bit of a contradiction in what he's saying. If he believes that prayerful support and pastoral support is allowed and should be allowed, why is he not supporting the amendment? That's all that is being asked for here. We're wanting to make sure that the definition of conversion practice does not include something as simple as prayer and pastoral support.
To be clear, what the Minister is asking for is not just that it includes prayerful and pastoral support, but to be clear, I don't think that a ban on conversion therapy could or should need to touch on those things. But let me be clear, he's not just calling for that in the amendment. What he's calling for is a much longer period, a period of consultation on the way ahead. Yes, we would need to consult on the detail. We would need to consult on the detail of legislative options, but I think it was water down the core purpose of the motion. But I do just want to make some progress. I've given away a couple of times. Doug Beattie noted that that he had spoken in favour of a ban on conversion therapy in 2021. I think that underlines the need for us to make some progress in terms of dealing with this. Both Shan Mulholland and Owen Tennyson spoke very impactfully about the need to progress this. I'm afraid I do reject what Mr. Allister said around conflating the contents of the Ash and Mackle report, as it were, with a specific piece of legislation. Should there be a piece of legislation either from the executive or from private members' legislation, Mr. Allister, and I'm sure he will be able to, as with every other MLA, able to debate what is in that legislation, and it will not be precisely the same as what is in a report by academics. That has provided, I'm sure, some very useful evidence, and that's why it's mentioned in the report. The Minister talked about referencing one side of the debate. Again, I would slightly push back at the idea that there's one side and then another that is hostile. My understanding is that most people here believe that we should move away from and ban those harmful practices. I don't think there needs to be necessarily a binary. The implication is that there are
the member draws remarks
people
to
who don't want to ban
please.
it. So, but I do recognise that it is important that we are clear that freedom of religion and freedom of expression are complete absolutes in a liberal society. We can proceed to ban harmful conversion therapy without going anywhere near impinging upon those practices, and I commend this opposition to motion to the Assembly.
Okay, thank you. The question is that the amendment standing in the name of Brian Kingston, Maurice Bradley and Trevor Clark be made. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those contrary say no. Clear the lobbies. The question will be put in 3 minutes. Order. Order. Members, please resume your seats. Order. Nice and quiet, please. Thank you. The question is that the amendment standing in the name of Brian Kingston, Maurice Bradley and Trevor Clark be made. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those contrary say no. Aye. Do we have tellers? Order. Order. Tellers have been appointed as follows. Tellers for the ayes are Maurice Bradley and Brian Kingston. Tellers for the noes are Danny Donnelly and Shane McLaughlin. Clear the lobbies. The Assembly will divide. Ayes to my right, noes to my left. Secure the doors. Order, order. Can members please resume their seats? And a bit of... Thank you, Minister. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Oh, very nice. Okay. Clerk, could you please read the result, please?
71 members voted. 29 members voted aye. 42 members voted no. The amendment falls.
Unfasten the doors. The question now is that the amendment standing on the order paper be agreed. All those in favour say aye. I say again. Order paper be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those contrary say no. 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 Whips in accordance with Standing Order 27(1)AB that there's agreement that we can dispense with the 3 minutes and move straight to the division. So I now call for tellers. Do we have tellers? delay of a few moments, just in case you're wondering. So please chat amongst yourselves amiably like you've been doing. Thank you. Order, order. Ladies and gentlemen, tellers have been appointed as follows. Tellers for the ayes are Danny Donnelly and Daniel McCrossan, and tellers for the noes are Maurice Bradley and Brian Kingston. Clear the lobbies. The Assembly will divide ayes to my right, noes to my left. Order, order. Can I have the members resume their seats, please? Ladies and gentlemen, we're having a difficulty with the computer, which very definitely says no at this present moment in time, and we're going to have to rerun the division once we've reset the computers. So can I have everybody's forbearance while we sort this particular issue out? Order, order. Steady. Order. Tellers have been appointed as followers. Tellers for the ayes are Maurice Bradley and Brian Kingston. Tellers for the noes are Danny Donnelly and Daniel McCrossan. Clear the lobbies. The Assembly will divide. Ayes to my right, noes to my left.
Did you say Danny?
Yes, okay.
It's for a no?
Secure the doors. Order, order. Could members please resume their seats?
"66 members voted. 41 members voted aye. 25 members voted no. The motion is carried.
Motion is carried. Unfasten the doors.